everyone, and thank you for being here. Councilmember Navarro approves that you can't be in two places at once in the very beginning this evening. She's going to be late. She had texted me, though she will be here for part of the interviews, but she had as we all do from time to time, it's one of those days that you're supposed to have a couple places at once. But we'd like to, first off, thank each of you for applying for this most important advisory board. Each of you has very impressive resumes, which we have read. This is how the format is going to work. I'm going to ask the first question, and then each council member will ask one as well. We're asking that each applicant please take no more than 2 minutes to answer each question. I will let you know if you're going to go over the 2 minutes or when you're at 2 minutes. And I'm going to rotate the order so not everybody is answering the first question each time. We're going to rotate that as well. And with that, we're going to begin. The first question is each candidate briefly describe why you want to become a member of the Police Advisory Commission. And given your background and experience, what do you hope to accomplish as a member? And we're going to do this in alphabetical order. So the first person is Ms. Fredrickson.
Unmute, Noel. Yeah, I should know that by now with all the Zooming we're all doing all the time. So thank you all for allowing me to speak to you this evening. I apply with a great deal of humility, I have to say, because I think this is such an important mission. And the prospect of being chosen would be such an honor for me. I think it's vital that Montgomery County in particular, but this nation as a whole, examine how we can reimagine our public safety regime. I think Montgomery County should be at the head, should be a model for the rest of the nation as we work our way through. I think we have a moment where there's actual possibility for transformation and reimagining that is greater than we've seen in quite some time. And so that gives me great hope. There are a lot of obstacles in the way that we'd have to work through. But I'd like to be a partner with the council, with the other members of the commission, with the community, and with the police force in addressing how we can make Montgomery County one of the best communities for public safety in our country. And so with that, I just say I have a long background in public policy. I'm a law professor now at Georgetown, and I ran a group called the American Constitution Society. I ran the ACLU's legislative arm, and so have worked a lot on issues around policing and sentencing, criminal justice, and civil rights, as well as, I should say, I started my career in the law as a union side labor lawyer, so I'm also quite familiar with some of the issues that have come up in the context of the collective bargaining agreement and public sector employees. And so I think I'd have a lot to offer. Again, I think it's an incredible opportunity for Montgomery County, and the timing is apt to take advantage of it. And so I'd love to be part of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lynn.
Is muted.
Yep, yeah. Jen. Yep.
Oh,
here we go.
All right,
we'll start you over. Go ahead, please.
I'm here speaking on behalf of hundreds of families of adults with disabilities and our most vulnerable residents. I moved here to Montgomery County as a young television producer in 1999, and we adopted our child at birth in 2002. He is super charismatic and intelligent and multiply and invisibly disabled, but he also has beautiful brown skin, which we see as a wonderful attribute. In order to learn how to help Jake reach his God-given potential, I dropped my television career and I immersed myself in the disability community. I started learning behavior strategies, parent empowerment. I worked in special ed classrooms for many years. Our family soon went from writing the news to being on the news around the world, as Jake, at 13 years old, became the Montgomery County Police Chief Autism Ambassador. Some of you know him already. We have been afraid to call the police. and we've had the police called on our family. We have helped the police search for our missing friends with autism. We have criticized the police, and we've had to call the police on Jake, and have been very, very scared. And then with Jake, due to all of those things, we have actually trained several thousand police officers across the country, especially here in Montgomery County, at CIT and academy trainings and at many conferences. We count the police of all ranks among our closest family members, as many of them have saved Jake's life. My favorite line from one of Jake's trainings, and what is empowering me to do this right now, is, "You might think I look like your average handsome teenager, but if I get scared or have a behavior on the street, you're going to shoot me." And that's a very sobering quote, and it makes the police wake up. And it is very scary as a parent. His trainings with Officer Reyes have earned recognition from the Obama administration, the state, county, and city officials. So with the conviction of a mama's heart and promises, I swear I promised all of my disability families, now is the time to be the change, and we're leading the way in that. So thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Ms. Martinez.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ana Martinez. I am a Montgomery County resident, and I'm also an immigrant. I moved to the Montgomery County area when I was 9 years old from Nicaragua, and now I'm an immigrant rights activist. I've been doing this for about 9 years, making sure that the community is informed about their rights, that they're informed about different resources, and that we help them to get their voice out there to make sure that we push for different policies. And this is a similar approach that we take with the police commission, making sure that our ears are on the ground, that we're always hearing what is happening, and that we're looking at the data, comparing it with what's happening with the voices that we're hearing, and so working with the county executive as well as the county council to make sure how we can move forward.
Thank you. Ms. Mirza.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. I am so honored to be here having this conversation with all of you, and very excited to do my part in reimagining public safety for myself and my neighbors. I think first and foremost, the reason that I would like to be part of this particular commission is because this is home. I think none of us should have to feel afraid of the very people that are charged with ensuring our safety when we are at home. And especially in Montgomery County, which has been such a welcoming place for me personally, it really pains me that specific incidents and specific patterns of violence can really make a lot of people feel unsafe. I realize that I'm part of many communities that have been routinely marginalized. I know that my family, who are part of the Muslim community, the immigrant community, the transgender community, we are all very familiar with even the most basic actions on an everyday basis can be policed, whether that means being under surveillance for reasons that are not merited, whether that means discrimination, whether that means violence. I think I carry all of those stories with me, and that is what I bring to this work. And I really want to make sure that people that I consider family do not have to fear for their safety. And to echo some of what's been said already, I think we're at a very interesting moment where there is this real energy for change. And I see that in the people that have been doing this work, both in your offices and amongst my neighbors who've been working so hard to take our vision, our shared vision for public safety and realize that. And that is the spirit with which I'd love to be part of this commission.
Thank you very much. Council Vice President Hucker, did you have a question?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. President. I want to first thank all of you for putting yourselves forward at such an important and such a promising time. You're right. We really can't miss this moment to create an awful lot of social change, and we're really counting on you to help us in every way. And we're grateful for your putting yourself forward like this. My question is: Black Lives Matter is only the latest movement challenging our country to live up to its ideals. What are your thoughts on that movement, and how would it inform your actions on the commission?
Thank you. The first person to answer the question is Ms. Lynn.
Look at that. I unmuted.
Yep. I was going to say, you're all of you are welcome to who are answering the questions, not to mute each time. You're fine to do it, but you'll be up enough that it's going to happen. So anyhow, please, Lynn, please, Ms.
Okay,
Lynn,
so
please.
well, I have I kind of see both sides of the Black Lives Matter movement. We are fully in support of equal rights for everyone, because I see my son, who is brown, living in this world after we're gone, and he needs to be treated equally and fairly. Racism, it's a problem everywhere, and we can't say that just because you're a police officer or because you're an official that you're immune to racism. It is embedded in our society. I think that we really need to kind of look back and hold our emotions and learn to accept every person as being a person. And that's what I'm praying for, because, I have many, many people very dear to me that have brown skin. And I hope that my personal influence, being embedded in the Black community and the white community, can give a different perspective to this. I heard that, some people see Black Lives Matter as an exclusionary thing. I like to see Black Lives Matter too, and should be equal and on the same level as everyone else's life. So that's
Thank
what
you.
I have. Yep.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez.
So I'm a Latina, and I stand with the Black Lives Matters movement. I think it's important that we're in support, and my organization as well is in support. And I think it's a really important time, especially because we live in a society that is, in a way, hiding its true intentions. And I can even look at that when I look at my Montgomery County Public School experience. When I look at history classes, they taught us history in a very particular way. And there was a lot of different gaps and really removal of different perspectives that really should have been there, that should have been more voices of what happened within the Native American community as well as the African American and the Latinx. So I think that it's definitely important, and the Black Lives Matters movement is about starting to shatter that utopia that we have created in our mind that we supposedly symbolize, and start really focusing on how do we start creating changes within this community. The other aspects, I think that it's important to remember the different intersectionalities. Of course, there's different members that consider themselves within the Latinx community that could identify as Black, and also the different intersectionalities when it comes to gender and sexual orientation. And one other aspect that I think is important to discuss when it comes to the Black Lives Matter is the role of also the allies and how to be supportive in different ways. As an organizer, our message is always that the people that are impacted needs to be at the front, and the people that are not directly impacted, learning how to play a supportive role in making sure that we emphasize the voices that need to be heard. So I think it's like, as individuals, also figuring out important moments when we need to take a step forward and making sure that those voices are heard, as well as learning when to take a step back and making sure that we are supporting the various movements.
Thank you. Ms. Mercer.
I think the fact that the statement Black Lives Matter can sometimes be controversial really speaks to the heart of the problem. We're not even talking about Black lives being celebrated or honored. We're just talking about whether or not they matter. And sometimes that is really difficult for a lot of people to hear. I think I unequivocally endorse that statement. And I am more than willing, and have in the past had conversations with people who aren't quite ready to understand why even such a basic statement can mean so much to so many different people. So I'm more than willing to speak with people and to meet people where they're at in terms of understanding the roots of that statement. I think when we talk about policing in particular, it's very important to look at it in historical context. I've been so fortunate to learn from friends and organizers who've been doing this work in the Black Lives Matter movement for so long, about how modern day policing is a descendant of slave patrols in the U.S. And some of the design of that very shameful part of American history is echoed in modern day policing. So until we're able to reckon with that, we're not going to be able to move to a point where we can think about all people being treated equally. So in that regard, I think it's very important to consider the specific history behind policing as an institution. And we also need to be mindful of, how there are different people who feel very different ways about this. I'm looking at the fact that just in this past month, 6 of my sisters who are Black and trans have been killed. And it's a crisis that I feel, which is why I don't feel like equivocating on the statement that Black lives do matter.
Thank you. Ms. Frederickson.
Thank you. I have to say the statements of the other candidates have been very moving and inspiring. The Black Lives Matter movement for me has been a deeply inspiring one. I think it's really incredible how much organizing and activism have brought us to this place. And to some extent, there's been an analysis that this was sort of just people just came together and came out, but this has actually been hard work on the part of people who've been focused and building, and I think really a testament to the dedication of people who've been involved with Black Lives Matter in bringing issues forward and not giving up despite such obstacles, including at the highest level of leadership in this country, and to continuing to put these issues in front of people to the point where we now have a moment where you do see so many people coming together and the views of people in this country being transformed. I mean, it's really, again, one of the things that gives me cause for optimism is to see how much people have changed in this country in recognizing that racism is systemic and deeply ingrained, not just in our attitudes, but in our policies. And as Ms. Mirza was saying, I think the history of policing in this country definitely shows that. And I think it's why it's so important that the Black Lives Matter movement has brought a real focused attention to how policing has affected Black and brown communities in a way that has been very destructive, and how important it is to remedy that so that we can move forward as a nation. So I thank you, Councilman Hucker, for that great question, and I think it is worthy of just sort of recognizing the amazing contribution to our national dialogue that has been made by Black Lives Matter.
Thank you. The next question, I forgot to also mention, Councilmember Albernaz will be joining us shortly. He's on the same call as Councilmember Navarro. Councilmember Friedson will be the next person to ask the questions, please.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you to each of you for your willingness to serve in this really important role and to support and serve our community. My question for you is, should you be selected to this Police Advisory Commission after your term, what would success look like for you as an individual member, and what would success to you look like for the commission as a whole?
Thank you. First person is Ms. Mercer.
I think success for me personally would really look like forming effective working relationships with other members of the Commission. I'm very pleased that there's going to be 2 ex officio members representing law enforcement there, and I really look forward to working with them. I think there's so much I have to learn about the way they do their work, and I've been really heartened to see the ways in which members of law enforcement across the country have spoken up in favor of Black lives, and this real willingness on their part to really reimagine what their role in our public safety ecosystem is. I think success for the Commission would really involve how we are perceived in the community. I think that is something that we as individual members can hope for certain kinds of results, but I would really look to the communities that can hold all of us accountable. I'd look to my neighbors and see what, whether or not they are excited by the work we're able to do in the time that we have, whether they support the recommendations we bring forward, and that will really be the truest measure of our success.
Thank you. Ms. Frederickson.
All right, thank you. So for me personally, being able to serve on this commission by itself would be an enormous honor. And so I wouldn't want to say that was by itself a success, but it would certainly make me very proud to be part of it. I would feel that I had some success in participation by being able to assist in some way in bringing issues to the council that can assist in the making of new policy for Montgomery County, and participate in dialogue with the community, because I think that I know there is a one public forum that would be held at least per year, but I think the input of the community has to be really integrated in a much more organic way as we work. So I think to the extent that I could be part of developing networks of communication for information coming in as well as going out, I would feel that I had played some useful role. For the commission itself, I think, to the extent that we can bring to you some very useful policy recommendations, best practices from other jurisdictions, as well as the ideas and the experiences of community members of Montgomery County, so that you can have the materials to work from in order to move this county forward. And again, in order for Montgomery County to be the model jurisdiction that I think we all not just want it to be, but we really expect it to be.
Thank you. Ms. Lynn.
I think that there's many facets to what exactly success is going to look like for this group. I think the first thing would be having open and honest and hard conversations, which include the FOP and the police and the community, all discussing the hard stuff, because that's what we've all been avoiding forever. And I think that communication is going to be the beginning of this. I would love to see many more crisis units on the street for my developmentally disabled folks, followed by a place for them to go. This county is lacking in services for the disabled population, and that has hurt many, many people. I would love to see acceptance and inclusion for all members of this community, regardless of your lifestyle, your language, or your skills and deficits. That's a big one. It's a lofty one, but I think if we set the example, like Montgomery County does set the example in this country for many things, including police training for, autism police training. So I think we need to be able to, accept everyone and set the example of how we can all live, cohesively, and leave the council with clear and concise steps, which are backed by data and research. How we're going to fix this. This is what you do, A, B, and C, and it's not just a guess. It's data and proven practice and best practices.
Thank you. And Ms. Martinez.
So I think what would make this commission successful is, of course, making sure that we have different access to the various informations and to the data and what are the procedures, and we have the opportunity to understand a little bit how it works more internally, while at the same time start looking at the always, I think as our role should always be to have our ears on the ground and making sure that the data also doesn't match it with the stories that we're hearing and trying to understand that perspective. So I think that the process is also going to be really important, gathering the information as well as what's happening on the ground, and then creating the working with the different commissions and the different folks to make sure that we push policy forward. So I think that it's creating, since it's the first time, creating that procedure and making sure that the folks that other commissions in the future have that structure as well.
Thank you. The next council member to ask a question will be Council Member Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I also want to extend my gratitude to all of you for putting yourselves forward, and clearly the responses that you've already given in this short amount of time have given me a lot of food for thought, and so I really appreciate bringing yourselves into this conversation and into this space. And earlier this year, when Chief Jones came before the council for his confirmation hearing, I shared the following statistic with him, that since 2015, there have been 49 hate crimes here in Montgomery County involving sexual orientation, or gender bias. And that frequency of those types of incidents have only increased during that period of time, particularly against transgender women of color, many of whom have expressed concerns to me about their interactions with the police department right here at home. And so given those statistics, would love to hear your thoughts about your presence on the commission and how you would help address the concerns of members of the LGBTQ plus community, and in particular trans women of color, and their interactions with our police department.
Thank you. The first person to answer the question, please, will be Ms. Frederickson.
Right, thank you. It's a great question, and a very, very disturbing statistic. I think this whole endeavor is really about trust and the building of trust. And I think it was the council that framed it as reimagining public safety, reimagining policing. But that really, at bottom, that is rebuilding, or perhaps building for the first time, a trust environment. And that has to mean that there is transparency and accountability when there has been an incident, and particularly for vulnerable communities like transgender people of color who have been subjected to some terrible incidents. And again, even in Montgomery County, which we'd like to think was better than that, there's no place immune from hatred and racism, unfortunately. And so I think one of the real needs for this commission is to tackle how it is that police departments are handling those kinds of incidents. What kinds of responses do they have? Are they treating those as seriously as they treat other types of victimization? And if not, how do we get at that? What kinds of reports are filed? How are they acted on? What is the chain of command in making sure there's an appropriate response? I think developing response mechanisms for hate crimes is similar in many ways to developing response mechanisms in the issue of use of force and domestic violence and other places where police forces have been highly criticized for not just inadequate, but bad and inappropriate responses or non-response altogether. And I think that would be something that we need to tackle together to make sure that particularly vulnerable communities have the best possible police responsiveness. And if not, that we need to be able to tackle that.
Thank you. Ms. Lynn.
This is a really sensitive topic for me. I have two siblings that fall into this category, a sister and a brother. And it gets me really upset. I did not know this statistic, Evan. I'm not a big numbers person, but I am a person. I think that the way to empower people to make change is to give them a voice. I think if I've learned anything in my job with this community, that everybody wants to be valued, and everybody's got their own value, whatever their gift is, right? And I think if we just empower and include this population with the decision making, why is that? I don't know why that's so hard. Why can't, I've seen what happens when you bring an autistic kid into police and teach them about autism. Why can't we bring some members of this community to tell the police what they feel? And then the police need to share how and what they're going to do about it. And there does need to be transparency and there does need to be accountability. But I think the bottom line is every community, we just want to have our voices heard, and we want to feel important, and we want to feel valued. And that is what's going to empower everybody to get along. Maybe that's my pipe dream, but I know there's definitely a benefit to showing people their worth and having them feel important. And I don't think it's very hard.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez.
So I come from a diverse family, and I actually have a family member that considers herself a trans Black woman. And hearing that data, it's painful. And that's the reality that, and it's true, like those numbers need to be highlighted more. They need to be talked about more. Mm-hmm. And what comes to mind to me is what support did those community members receive? Because that to me sounds like a very traumatic situation. And I'm curious, did we provide them access to mental health? Did we provide them, do they have the social support within themselves? And how do we are providing the different components to make sure that they feel safe and that they can heal? Because that situation sounds traumatic. It sounds like there needs to be a little bit of a healing component, and creating the awareness within our community so those situations don't ever happen. So I'm grateful for you bringing it up, and that's definitely something that we need to start considering moving forward.
Thank you. Ms. Mirza.
Thank you so much for that question, Councilmember Glass. I think I do bring my lived expertise, and I use that term very intentionally, to this issue, as well as the lived expertise of my sisters in the community. But what I am very aware of is the gap between new policy and its effectiveness. As many of you may know from the materials I submitted, I spent about 4 years studying LGBTQ policy at the Center for American Progress, where a huge chunk of my work was in fact looking at local government and policies that local government can take on to be more inclusive of LGBTQ community members. And what I saw repeatedly in the research was all these wonderful models for new things that local government could do, but not a lot of research on the effectiveness of a new LGBTQ task force in the police force or on a commission. You know, did these efforts actually make community members feel more safe? Or was it, a step in the right direction, perhaps, but we don't really know. We have to be unafraid to know if what we're doing is working, and to also deal with the uncomfortable truth when it isn't. I so appreciate Anna's framing of how we need to look at what other supports these community members need that they're not getting, whether we're talking about access to healthcare, access to employment, what kinds of discrimination they're experiencing in those realms, and also thinking about whether they're criminalized just for existing. We live in a world where walking while trans is something we often talk about in the community as something that's criminalized. People will see you and immediately assume that you're a sex worker, which has happened to me as well. So we need to think about how we stop criminalizing basic things like someone being a criminal for being homeless, for carrying condoms. I think there's a lot of those things that we can address that will actually ensure safety.
Thank you. And the next council member to ask a question is Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to Ms. Frederickson, Ms. Martinez, Ms. Mirza, and Ms. Lynn. This is these have all been great. This is our second panel, but this one has been particularly enjoyable for me. I wish I could ask more than one question, but I won't. And I appreciate you all volunteering to apply. So a couple of, I think it's a month ago now, but for several weeks, I drafted a resolution that all of my colleagues supported, declaring racism a public health emergency in Montgomery County. There's been similar efforts in other parts of the country. And embedded in this, I think, is something that many of you have spoken about, is that we didn't just arrive where we are today, right? And that these systems that have been built, the anti-Blackness in particular, the dehumanization of people and their attributes, which has been, and that's a large list of different types of people, that propped up our economic system and is the foundation for everything we have. And in that we see bad outcomes, loss of life, certainly police violence, and negative health outcomes in the case of COVID, and so many other things. We die and have horrible life outcomes in many ways in result of due to racism. And in the police context, we've seen incidents here that have, in my view, been displays of that systemic form of racism, whether it's borne out in data, where 55% of the people who have been arrested in this county in 2018, 55% rather, who had force used against them in an interaction were Black. 50% of the residents who were arrested were Black, despite representing about 20% of the population. If you add Latino residents, you're over about 75%. You see that similar numbers in juvenile and in schools. We had a big discussion about that today. And we vest in our police a lot of authority, the ability to take life, the ability to deprive people of liberty, and we do it to keep because we want them to keep us safe and to protect and serve. And so my question to you, in light of that lead-in, do you believe that the system of policing in this country and in Montgomery County specifically is racist? And if so, why, and what do you think we can do about it? And if not, why?
Thank you. Ms. Lynn.
Man, I knew I was going to be first on this one. I hate to paint everybody with a broad brush. I hate to say all police is this or all white people are this or all whatever. Yes, racism exists. Police are not immune. Police are people, and they're also a reflection of our society. I think that we can't expect police to act in any way other than how regular people are going to act. Yes, they have more power, right, because they have weapons and things that are, afforded to them because of their job. But I don't know how to solve all the racism issues. I think that our culture is angry. I think that people are very judgmental and very scared. And I think that my son would be judged walking down the street at first glance like that because he has brown skin. That's very scary. And I think that the police also, there's a lot of emotions tied up in this, and people are afraid of what they don't know. And people are not talking to each other to even afford to learn about history or this family's background. It doesn't even have to be a black thing. It can be any race. And I think we're afraid to have the conversations. And, when people are scared, they get defensive and they make judgments and things that they probably regret later. So I think a lot of education needs to be done. Like I said, a lot of conversation. We're not going to solve the whole entire systemic racism problem, but we can set an example. And we can set an example of how our police are in the community and they're interacting with all members of our community. I mean, in my experience, in my family, we've had two forms of racism. One is the fear and hate racism that is trained, in some people in the world, right? And that's based on their view being more superior to other people. And the other is ignorance racism. I mean, my dad never spoke to a black person until my child, and my dad was over 70 years old. Okay, so there's a real piece of unknowing and not knowing and being afraid of what you don't know. I have to stop because it just gave me peace. That's what I got.
You can finish up, but
no, that's okay. But yeah, it exists. Yes, absolutely. I don't have all the answers, but we can definitely. We need some conversations.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez.
So sometimes I feel that we get stuck on the individual aspect of it, of looking if someone is racist. But if the question is the structure is racist, then the answer is yes. And looking at our president, so he uses a lot of terms when it comes to the immigrant community. And I'm purposely not choosing to give power to those words, but unfortunately all of us knows what those words are. And the reality that it's just history repeating itself, because these were the exact same terms that were used with the African American community when slavery ended, and they started to criminalize the African American community. And we know that within the civil rights movement, the criminalization of the African American community and the minorities increased. So we have a structure, and we know that we're in a capitalist system that has gained its wealth due to slavery and has now continued to gain its wealth with the prison system. So even I was reading an article that was talking about how some businesses are moving their product production to prisons versus maquilas because it's cheaper. And I think that's something that is concerning. And definitely, so I think that when it comes to Montgomery County, this is also, we have to start thinking about what we want here and making sure that we start creating a new system, that we don't get stuck in the past, but that we start creating that structure something that we can be proud of, and it's not stuck in history.
Thank you. Ms. Merzel.
I think a lot of people can get stuck, just as Anna was just saying, in that individual versus systemic reduction of this very big and very large problem. I do believe that the system is in fact racist, but that's not just the policing system. That is how this country was created. I mean, it goes right back to the Constitution and some people being not recognized in the very founding document of this country. Right? So I think we do need to recognize that the system was designed in a particular way. And that doesn't absolve each of us of having a responsibility to address it. I think we can all take time to unlearn the racism that's been taught to us by society, and I very much include myself in that. I think it's a lifelong commitment and effort to unlearn these biases, and also to work towards creating new systems that are going to be more equitable. To your question, Councilmember, about our county specifically, I think the numbers you cited speak for themselves. We need to look at which parts of the county are being policed the most, which neighborhoods, which particular individuals. I think once we have that evidence, we can, based on specific evidence, we can point to specific ways to make it better. But we do need to be comfortable at acknowledging the fact that we are in a system that was not designed to acknowledge the humanity of all of our neighbors.
Thank you. Ms. Frederickson.
Thank you. And Councilmember Jawando, thank you for that great question. I think there's no question here that that policing is systemically racist in this country, and for a lot of reasons. I think the other panelists were absolutely right to make the distinction between individual police officers and the system as a whole. But there's a history here, and it goes way back, like so many things in our country. I mean, you could take pretty much any area of the law, and I've looked a lot at employment and labor law, and can tell you that, it was our National Labor Relations Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act both have racism embedded in how they treat workers. Domestic workers and farm workers were cut out of those laws for the very reason that those were Black and brown people, particularly Black people in the South, who were working on farms and former plantations, and they didn't want to give them the same rights as the white workers in the North. So, those are things that are in those laws, and I think with policing, the danger is they have guns, and so it adds a whole nother level of existential harm here. And I think when we look at some of the police practices, you see how the system kind of continues, even when perhaps you have police forces that have more Black and brown members. You have practices and approaches to policing that include stop and frisk and other kinds of stops and broken windows policing that embed in the system, even with maybe perhaps a more diverse workforce, a way of approaching minority communities that leads to heightened violence. There's only one kind of response, really, that so many police forces have, and I think that's one of the things that in Montgomery County I'd like us to be able to explore is how can we give police departments new tools so that as they are engaged in their role in protecting public safety, they approach communities and individuals in a new way, which is about how trying to diffuse and de-escalate situations. How do they become partners with community members in keeping us all safe, in having a community that we all feel comfortable living in, where everybody feels valued and respected? They have to have those new tools, and breaking those habits and breaking those ways that police forces have traditionally responded to situations, using more mental health professionals to deal with situations that should be much more appropriately handled elsewhere. So I think your question is right on the mark. It's a systemic problem. It invades every part of the system, and we need to figure out how to break that down.
Thank you. The next person to ask the question is Councilmember Navarro. And Councilmember Navarro, glad to see you this evening, please.
Thank you so much. These days we're trying to be everywhere. Was just at an AIM meeting regarding Latino community and COVID-19 cases. So we're trying to figure it all out, but I'm so happy to be here and have an opportunity to ask just this general question. So as you know, we worked really hard last year in this county to pass a racial equity and social justice law, understanding that there are just so many things that are structural in nature. This county really is a microcosm of the country and the world, right? Just in MCPS, there are 157 countries represented. I know there's like over 150 languages spoken. So if you were to be appointed to this particular commission, taking all of that into consideration, what would be like your top 3 issues that you would want to tackle right away?
Okay, thank you. And the first person to answer the question is Ms. Martinez.
No, so first, I want to say congratulations to Councilmember Navarro for passing this, and I know that there's a lot of different members that have started within the commission soon. They're starting soon and had just been selected. And I think that, well, when it comes to the issues that we need to face, first, we need to make sure that we have proper communication within the 2 different task force. Just because we know that as we're starting to see situations with police, we're going to start looking at various solutions, and we need to make sure that we're working hand in hand on those solutions. And looking at those issues, we also need to look at the mental health component, which is something that we're going to have to be working in collaboration, and also other different forms of resources that our community needs. I mean, when it comes to the other aspects that we need to look for, it's also the treatment of the police officers when it comes to community members, and start looking at those various cases to see how we can create changes in the future.
Thank you. Ms. Mirza.
I think there's definitely a huge cultural gap with some of these communities in terms of hesitation to come forward around certain issues. And I hate to generalize like this because, as you've noted, Councilmember, there's such a great diversity represented in our county that it's really hard to identify any kind of overarching policy or intervention. I do certainly think about how there's we need to address the lack of understanding around certain issues, and it might be helpful to look at it through the lens of a particular example. I've had someone in my chosen family have an issue with fraud, and the way they dealt with that, and were just so concerned about bringing it forward to the police. Yet we know that it's only when we can identify these patterns and track this data that members of law enforcement can do something to address these issues. So to the extent that we can address language access, cultural barriers, understandings of how the legal systems can, in fact, protect us from certain kinds of harm, I think that really needs to be addressed. And to the extent that we can create culturally sensitive mechanisms for reporting this kind of harm, whether that's within the policing system or if we want to imagine alternative systems, I think that can go a long way towards keeping us all more safe.
Thank you. Ms. Frederickson.
I thank you, and welcome Councilmember Navarro. I heartily endorse what the other candidates said. I think they're absolutely right. I think communication is a vital piece. I mean, I think we all agree that it's one of the sources of the vitality of Montgomery County is this richness of diversity that makes it a wonderful and exciting place to live, but obviously presents additional challenges in terms of reaching out to those communities. I'd like to think that this commission, in partnership with the other commissions of the council and the council itself, will be working on developing better mechanisms to improve the ways that there can be input from different communities. And I think we have to be very creative in terms of language access and cultural sensitivity to make sure that we're getting to as many communities as we possibly can. But that's why I think, as much as the quantitative piece around policing reform is very important, we need to know how many traffic stops are happening and which communities are most effective. But it's the qualitative and experiential piece that I think can really help us understand how to build that trust between different communities and the police force. And I do think it also means having other avenues for reporting different kinds of incidents and unbundling to some extent the different responsibilities that are now put on the police force in many cases for officers who don't have the skills or background, the training to handle what they're being asked to do. And it's no surprise that some of them don't handle those responsibilities very well, and oftentimes without any ill will, just without the training, without the support, they're forced into situations that I think are beyond their capabilities. And so I think, looking at that and thinking, how do we make sure that something that is a, consumer issue or a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue, that people in all the different communities, they don't have to call 911. They have someplace else to go.
Thank you. Ms. Lynn.
Yes, pretty much all of my answers are now taken. I loved, the idea I had said earlier about, empowering every community to take part in the training and to take part in these conversations, not just say, here's us and we're going to do this to you. It's got to be a come in and tell us how to help you the best. And I'm a huge advocate of opening those conversations with all populations. If there's language barriers, I've seen the police send out people that speak different languages to help other families of ours. So I think that that's possible. I think the communication is important. I also think we need to focus on mental health, not just for people with physical disabilities or something, autism. These are invisible disabilities that police officers are not trained to handle. Even me, with all of my behavior and background, I'm not trained to handle. We need real professionals showing up at these homes or these sites where there is someone having a mental breakdown. And that's super important because, like I said before, people are afraid of what they don't know. An officer who is there on the defense trying to save his life or her life is not going to recognize that that's autism, or that could be a bipolar break, or that could be you can't decipher that. You need to have experts in there to de-escalate quickly and to calm the person. And then once that crisis team is there, they need to have someplace to go. This county is lacking in services. The whole state is lacking in services. There's now one hospital to go to if you have a kid with autism or a mental issue. And a lot of work needs to be done. And our families cannot be afraid to call the police. There has to be. We need a re-imaging of the police. We need to soften the police. It cannot be us versus them. It needs to be real, genuine communication on both sides of this issue.
Thank you. The next council member to ask a question is Council Member Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you to all four of you. I agree with what Councilmember Duando said. I've been incredibly impressed by your answers, so much so that I actually want to ask a different question, but I can't. I have to be consistent, and so so it is what it is. We cannot ignore legitimate concerns and criticism that students and other members in the school community have about all forms of law enforcement and their presence in our schools. But understanding that students who bring guns or knives to our schools, like what happened in my daughter's middle school, or those who bring large amounts of drugs into our schools, can be arrested by police officers regardless of whether they are stationed at a school or not. Do you think that a well-trained school resource officer that operates more like a counselor and educator, working with students to diffuse peer-to-peer and peer-to-teacher conflict and help address issues such as drug and alcohol use, should be in our high schools?
Thank you. The first person to answer the question is Ms. Mirza.
Thank you, Council Member, for a very specific question. To be frank, I don't feel qualified to answer that. I think the issue of how school resource officers operate in our schools, particularly in Montgomery County, is an issue to which I would consult with so many of the student activists that I've been in conversation with over the last few weeks in preparation for a potential appointment to this commission. And I think these students are very clear about both the harm that is caused by the presence of SROs, and are also rightfully concerned about what their absence would mean in terms of some of the specific duties they conduct in these schools. I think we know overall that the presence of police in all aspects of our life and to charge the police with dealing with every possible crisis under the sun is an unfair expectation of officers. And yet we also know that there needs to be mechanisms to address violence. I'm hopeful that there are solutions that we can think of that are creative and beyond what we see in the world right now. I'm hopeful that Montgomery County can be that testing ground for trying out some of those new ideas. And I know that our young people are more than equipped to be not just active participants in that conversation, but also be the ones coming up with what these new models of safety could look like.
Thank you. Ms. Frederickson.
Thank you, and thank you, Councilmember Rice, for the very, very good and difficult question. I would say, similar to Ms. Mirza, I think it's really important to look at best practices here. My question is, does this work? In different jurisdictions, do school resource officers actually diffuse situations? And if so, what's the model look like? I imagine that they could be seen as counselors, as there to answer questions, to intervene, as those who can help diffuse situations that get tense. So working much more as a social worker in some ways. And, I guess there may be some kind of a hybrid with the relationship with the police department, but not of the police department, that might be a way of making sure that there are resources available if something comes to a head, but not making the students feel like they're being surveilled while they're in school and perhaps engaged in a little bit of behavior that might be, a roughhousing kind of thing that, I think oftentimes when you have somebody who is police in the school, they see that as a potential violent situation, and instead of de-escalating it or diffusing the crisis, they intervene in a way that turns it into a crime. And we've seen examples of that, particularly affecting minority students, being chained to a desk, being stuck in a locked room, being treated in a way that treats them like a criminal, where if there had been another approach and treated them as somebody who needed somebody to talk to, a counselor or mental health guidance, or somehow to have an alternative mechanism to get out of a situation that could otherwise be complicated. So that's not really a straightforward answer, but I think it's a tough one, but I lean much more in that direction than towards a full-blown police officer in a school.
Thank you. Ms. Lynn.
I think that if we're going to solve this racism problem, or this policing problem, I think the image of the police, it needs to be, in their most impressionable years, it needs to be positive, right? So if you have an SRO in the school, whether they're in plain clothes, in a softer uniform, in something that doesn't look scary, right? They can emerge as role models for our very impressionable middle school and high schoolers. I think they can be looked up to. I think if they develop a relationship of trust with the students, that's beneficial. Many of our kids go to school from broken homes where they don't have that role model in their family, and if you can have the trust of someone in this role in a school, whether I think that they would need special other training, not just the police academy. They would need some softer skills. I know for one that the SRO at the high school in my neighborhood is amazing. We don't even go to that school, and we rolled up and talked to him in the parking lot for an hour, and he stood there and he talked, and it was wonderful. And if you can find people like that, officers that like kids, officers that aren't going in there as a, hey, I'm here, law and order guy, but as a partnership guy, and let's help grow each other. And let's be open to learning from each other. Like, what is your family doing? Or how come you think that way? I mean, there's a lot to be gained, and this problem has to start when they're young. You're not going to solve racism in adults, and you're not going to solve adult police. If you can bring kids to the pipeline, and I heard the chief talk last night on another policing call that many of the kids where there are SROs in the school are coming into the cadet academies and becoming police officers. So what better or more perfect situation of a role model or someone to look up to where you can just go into that pipeline and get to the academy and we need police. and we need police that are open-minded and understanding.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Ms. Martinez.
When it comes to the SLRs, I don't think that we need to have police officers within the school system. I believe in safety, and I believe that we should have security guards and that we should have safety protocols and making sure that we protect our students. But we don't need to create a system where we know that young people are already, we know that the Latino and the African American community are the ones that are under watch when it comes to the police officers and are starting a criminalizing process at an early age. And I actually was talking to a student earlier this year, and he told me he didn't want to go to college. So I decided to push him a little bit, the reasoning behind this. And I asked him to dream big. If he could think of anything that he could be, what would it be? And what he told me is that he wished he could be a counselor because he wished that he could be there for other children, how he wished an adult would have been there for him and his friends. And what we have to remember is that when we're talking about the schools, we're talking about children. We're talking about young adults that are trying to figure out their life, that are dealing with a lot of different trauma and a lot of different situations at their home and different aspects of it. And we need to make sure that we handle the situations using different resources, making sure that we have more counselors, making sure that we have more support from the teachers and access to resources. So we definitely need to start looking at other solutions, not leading to a situation where that small little situations that could have been handled by the administration or something like that, that starts creating a record for people at an early age. So I do think that we definitely need to start looking at not what it's also meant to be, but what is the impact that it's having within our students, in particular our minority students.
Thank you. The next council member to ask a question is Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this conversation tonight and hearing from so many of you who are leading the community in different ways, and some incredible experiences that you bring to the table. So thank you. I'm very happy and very, I guess, gratified that we're moving forward on this commission. It was a long road to propose this and get it adopted, and I want to thank my colleagues for supporting this. And I think I'm really optimistic about what we're going to achieve. Wanted to give you a chance to just highlight any particular issue or issues, that you want to talk about that you haven't had a chance. The commission is a policing policy advisory commission, so it is intended to get into the policies and practices of the department, which is, of course, how people experience policing in the community. So. That's a broad mandate. At the same time, it has some specific or substantive content that we will be seeking your voice, to weigh in on. So if there are any particular police issues, police policy, public policy issues about police work, however you want to frame it in your own mind, I just welcome. I give you the floor to. Say something that you think we really ought to be looking at around police work in this county.
Thank you. The first person to answer the question, please, is Ms. Frederickson.
Hi, thank you, and Councilmember Reamer. That's a good question and a hard one, and because there are so many issues here. I don't think I'm going to say anything that's probably terribly creative or new, but there are some key issues that I hope this commission, in partnership with the council, can take on. Accountability and transparency for the police force. I know there are limitations under Maryland law and the collective bargaining agreement, but in partnership with the police force as well, I think what are the issues that we can address even without being able to change Maryland law and the collective bargaining agreement? What are the powers of the police chief that he may have that actually could change some of the reporting requirements for police officers? I'd really like to explore that because I think there are mechanisms that might enable Montgomery County to have a more fulsome accountability process, and so that we'd have a better understanding of what's happening in the county, and that there are actual measures taken for when officers are inappropriately use force or otherwise interact with the community in a way that is inappropriate or harmful. I think training issues are one that are vital, and I think we've talked a lot this evening about the role of mental health counselors and substance abuse and all the other issues that arise in the course of the day of a police officer that they're not equipped to handle. It's both, as I said earlier, the unbundling, but it's also, if they are the first on the scene, what should they do? How should they react? Instead of, I think, what they're often trained to do, which is use of force, which is, they've got a gun, they've got a billy club, they've got, those are the tools they've been taught to use. They haven't really been taught those soft skills, I think, that Ms. Lynn talked about, to interact with somebody who is suffering some kind of a break, who could be talked down rather than beaten down. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lynn.
Well, I have to speak on behalf of my community that I'm hoping to represent. It's not okay that my families are afraid to call the police. They shouldn't be afraid. They need to know that they're trained and that they will come with an expert in mental health. If they have a real emergency, there needs to be another way. An officer can come with a crisis team, but one crisis team in a county of more than 1 million people is not okay either. There are so many families that are in need, and I have parents calling me that they're afraid to be living with their kid. There are so many lacking resources, and they can't call the police because then the kid can end up, the pipeline. They go to the emergency room, they live there for 4 weeks, they go to Shepherd Pratt, they're kicked out after 10 days, and there's nowhere to go and there's no help. So the system is very, very broken. We need work, we need social workers, we need people that can come in. We've had good and bad experiences here. One time when my son hurt himself, we had a cop running from the driveway who was not trained by us, untrained, but he ran screaming across my front yard, "Does he have a weapon?" How do you approach a house like that? I know there's police protection, they need to defend themselves, but when you're coming to a house where there's a kid with autism, you don't scream, "Does he have weapons?" As you're approaching the door, across the front yard. That escalated our situation like 50-fold, and we were in the hospital. So a lot of, Lori and Tara, and, there's excellent training for autism, but a cop rolling up to that situation without help, without mental health, without an autism expert, without someone that understands mental illness, it's not fair. And it's not fair to the police, and it's not fair to my families. So that's a really big hot button for me, and I'm going to stop before I start crying.
Thank you, and don't cry.
Oh, man.
Ms. Martinez.
One question that comes to mind that we haven't talked about is, and this happens in various counties, and my understanding is that it happens as well as Montgomery County, is also the how do people get onto the gang list? Now, my understanding, there's an internal list where people, or either their symbols or different for different reasons, can get on this list, and it's very difficult to get off. In my understanding, there's a lot of times where people are categorized into categories that don't fall into that, and that's a way that it's used to, as well as to criminalize within the Latino community and the African American community. But I think that that's something that would be interesting to hear. What is the situation happening more in Montgomery County? And how do we make processes that it's not putting folks into different categories that are difficult to get out of? The other aspect is definitely the de-escalation when it comes to various situations. We know that there's been situations where people's lives have died that shouldn't have. And we need to start creating systems in place that provide more support during those moments of crisis. The third aspect, I think, would be a little bit more the cultural competence. How do we make sure? And I think the cultural competence can also take into consideration the different aspects and the different identities that we have here in Montgomery County. So not only the cultural competency, but how do we start looking at other people's identities, including sexual orientation and gender identification, that we're taking this into consideration when we are providing the proper trainings when it comes to police officers, as well as making sure that we de-escalate situations within our community.
Thank you. Ms. Mirza.
One of the things I'm really excited about for this commission is its ability to request data from law enforcement authorities to make more informed decisions. As I've mentioned, I'm a researcher by training. It's something that really excites me, and using the evidence available to us to make decisions. And I think one thing I'm very aware of is we're at a time when so many in our community are echoing calls to defund the police. Regardless of where we individually fall on that, I think it is important to look at the budget and how it's set up in our county. I come to this work, being very aware of Dr. King's call that budgets are in fact moral documents, and looking at how our structures are set up, and really making sure that the officers are set up for success. If officers are finding excuses, as we know they're doing in other parts of the country, to stay on to get overtime close to the end of their shift by finding some reason to find that someone had a broken taillight or some other small offense, and using that as a reason to stay on later. We should ensure that anyone who's working is being compensated adequately, such that they don't have those what economists would call perverse incentives. Once again, I apologize for the academic jargon, but really thinking about how things are set up. I know in a lot of police departments, revenue is coming in from traffic stops, fines, fees, tickets, criminalizing people for being homeless. And it should not be that way, right? We need to think about how we are funding our police force such that officers don't spend as much of their time as we know they do in other parts of the country. And I'm so excited to see the data for our county enforcing these fines such that their priority is in fact safety.
Thank you. The council member who's going to ask the last question of the evening is Council Member Albornoz. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. As all of you speak, I'm thinking, man, this is going to be a really tough decision. You are all outstanding. I mean, really, truly. And I think the mark of a strong community is civic advocacy and civic engagement. And we have that in spades here in Montgomery County, and you're further evidence of it. So thank you for your interest and your willingness to step forward and serve. Last year, the council, led by Councilmember Navarro and also Councilmember Rice, and supported by our entire council, had a lot of discussions around community policing. And specifically, we passed a bill that helped set up some formal framework, because as we learned through the racial equity work and the conversations with the community policing means different things to different people. And so I'm curious as to what it means to you and how you would define community policing.
Thank you. And the first person to answer is Ms. Lynn.
I think that community policing is going to require more time spent getting to know your neighborhood, spent getting to know the people that live in your district. I think a lot of times, we can walk into our police district and not even recognize who's working there, you don't know who the boss is, you don't know who, and I think that's a problem. I think our police need to be more visible, and I've seen it happen. I mean, I've seen it happen when police are visible in the communities and have a softer front, and they're not carrying giant weapons. They can show up at little parties, and they can show up and check on neighbors. Like, one of the great things we do, if there's a call for a family with autism, there's always a follow-up call the next day to make sure the family is okay, and that needs to be in across the board, which shows that the police care and that we're on the same level as the police. It's not us versus them, but it's us working together and communicating and accepting everybody for whatever walk of life they come from, that we're all humans. And we're all fighting for the same thing. We all want the same rights. And I think that if the police can recognize that and be more present in the community, and more available instead of doing reports or just watching traffic. I mean, there's ways to make them more visible. And I think that, to me, that's what community policing is. So there's a relationship there. Each family is comfortable with the police, and it's a positive relationship. And you can call for help, and that your friend, Officer Joey, is going to show up and it's going to be okay. And that would go a long way to help many, many families that I know personally, including my own, feel better. And then if the police are at the same level as us, there's no superiority, right? So it's going to take some image work.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez.
So to me, community policing it's a concept of seeing people as humans, and we always have to have that at the front. I was talking to someone who used to be part of the gang task force, and this is a little bit coming back to the message that I had provided prior. But he was telling me how they train police officers to look for gang members, and they look for the tattoos, and they look for the colors, and they look for symbols. And to me, that was very concerning, because it's almost teaching people how to categorize people and how to start looking for things that what we should be doing is listening to people, talking to them, seeing them for who they are, regardless if they have a tattoo, regardless of what color. Because the reality is that there's a lot of people that have been told they were a gang member, and when they weren't, and when you ask them what the situation happened, is because they were wearing the wrong color, they're wearing the wrong symbol, or things like that. So we have to treat people like people and listen and know that people are super complicated. And usually when you're having a bad day, it's usually because 4 different things are falling apart at the same time. And COVID-19 is the perfect example of that. That people are going through a crisis when it comes to food, when it comes to housing, when it comes to their health aspect of it, employment all at once. So for me, it's always seeing people as who they are and trying to figure out how we can provide them the support and the resources to succeed, and also how to connect them to the various departments to make sure that they have that support.
Thank you. Ms. Mirza.
We can't have this conversation without acknowledging the immense amounts of pain and hurt and the legacies of pain and hurt that already exist in our communities because of policing. I'm very aware of the fact that in Muslim communities in particular, we are so used to seeing a friendly face from law enforcement, while also knowing that things as simple as acknowledging that racism exists in the US, having an interest in social justice, are literal criteria for identifying someone as a terrorist threat. That is not how we can get to a model of successful community policing. I know so many people who live in sanctuary cities, and police have come out and made a good faith effort to connect with them, and yet when ICE shows up and asks local law enforcement to cooperate, that ends up happening. So unless we acknowledge that these promises have been empty in the past and have a very real reckoning with the betrayal felt in these communities, we can't move forward. So I know that's a very roundabout way of addressing your question, Council Member, but I think it's very important to acknowledge the sense of betrayal and the broken trust that exists in communities.
Thank you. Ms. Fredrickson.
Thank you, and thank you for another great question. I think community policing is really a mixed bag, because it's something that it sounds great, but the implementation is the key part. And I think, one of the things I'd like to look at as we, if I were selected for this commission, is how is it played out in Montgomery County, and what are the examples from elsewhere? How do we actually make sure that police officers see this as a value? That working in community policing is not just getting out of your car every once in a while so you can go out and stop and frisk a young black man. There has to be an ideal of what that means. How are they interacting with the community? How are we valuing that a police officer is working as a mentor in an after-school program, and that's part of the responsibilities of the officer. It's not something that he or she has to do on their free time. How are they interacting with the community in other ways that are non-confrontational, that are peace-oriented, that are joyful? I would say I was very inspired to hear that at one of the demonstrations in Silver Spring with Black Lives Matter, there were police officers who showed up and kneeled with the protesters. I think that kind of a demonstration of commitment to anti-racism is a welcome moment. But we really need more. We need to think about how do we invest in a process so that aspect of their work is more important than what I think Ms. Mirza talked about earlier, which is I think a critical problem with the need to earn overtime. And I think the Camden, New Jersey Police Department, when the police chief remade that police department, part of it was because there were so many officers who were working second and third jobs, and as a result, it put these perverse incentives on them to administer fines and so forth. So I think revaluing that, reimagining it, and approaching community policing as a values-enhancing mechanism for this county.
Well, thank you all very, very much. I believe it's been said several times this evening. Thanks for making a very difficult decision for us. Every one of you, and we had interviews last night. We'll have more interviews. Each and every one of you has not only answered the questions well, you've given us great thought that we need to think about in addition. So we thank you for applying. We thank you for being involved. You will hear from us. Our goal is to appoint this advisory board by the end of this month. We have many meetings, and we have to get through several interviews, and we hopefully will meet our goal, and we're going to try our best to do that. But that's our goal, so that we will have an advisory board appointed by the end of this month. So thank you very much, and you all will be hearing from us. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Basis as well.
So we've had several incidents where she has intervened with a child. One was right when we first got her. There was a panic alarm coming from our family division. Two parents were going through a custody dispute, and they had their 12-year-old daughter.